Welcome to Crying Out Loud. I'm Dr. Laura Berman, and this is your grief companion. Join me to learn how to soften the pain, steady the nervous system, and connect to your loved ones on the other side. None of us were meant to grieve alone, so let's cry out loud together.
So I'm crying out loud, I'm not holding it in, I'm shrinking my heart.
In this episode of Crying Out Loud, we're talking about one of the most challenging realities of grief. What happens when there are no clear answers, no neat endings, and no closure? My guest is Dr. Pauline Boss, family therapist, educator, researcher, and professor emeritus at the University of Minnesota. She is internationally recognized as the pioneering voice behind the concept of ambiguous loss. It's a framework that has transformed the way that we understand grief, trauma, resilience, dementia, estrangement, addiction, family rupture, abduction, and other losses that leave us suspended between presence and absence. She's the author of numerous groundbreaking books, including the well-known Ambiguous Loss, Learning to Live with Unresolved Grief, Loving Someone Who Has Dementia, and her most recent book, The Myth of Closure, Ambiguous Loss in a Time of Pandemic and Change. Her work challenges one of our culture's most enduring beliefs that healing requires closure. Instead, Dr. Boss is teaching us how to build meaningful lives even when so many questions may remain unanswered. I'm so excited to share this conversation with Dr. Pauline Boss with you on Crying Out Loud. Dr. Boss, thank you so much for joining us on Crying Out Loud.
It's my pleasure to be here.
Now, you 50 years ago, I think, coined the term ambiguous loss. So let's just start there. What exactly is ambiguous loss?
Well, ambiguous loss is a loss that remains unclear. It's just simple answer. It's an unclear loss. But because it's an unclear loss, you don't know if the person is dead or alive or if they're coming back or not. It results in a frozen kind of grief. There are two kinds of ambiguous loss. The first is physical, and the second is psychological. And the first one is what I studied as a graduate student at the University of Wisconsin. And that was wives whose husbands were missing in action in Vietnam and Southeast Asia. So the body is missing, the person is physically missing, but they are kept psychologically present because the family left behind doesn't know if they're dead or alive.
Yeah.
The second kind I studied was psychological ambiguous loss, where the person is there, perhaps even sitting in front of you, physically present, but psychologically absent. And I studied veterans who had Alzheimer's disease or brain injury from battle. So they were cognitively impaired. So there are many other different kinds of each one, the physical and the psychological, and we can go into that. And I'm sure your listeners have examples too. So that's the two kinds of ambiguous loss.
Yeah, and I can think of a lot of examples just, as I was thinking about what you're saying, and even before we got, on, is this idea, we were hearing a lot lately in the public arena about estranged relationships, especially between parents and children. And I work a ton with grieving parents and hear from many, many parents whose children are still physically alive, but are estranged from them and want zero contact and have cut them off. I'm assuming that is a form of ambiguous loss
Yes.
Yes.
And it's very hard to undo that. Ghosting, I think, is the current word for it.
Yes.
It's very, very cruel, I think. And it is a phenomenon that was rarely heard of before.
Yeah.
Um, the reason I bring up ambiguous loss and call it that is you can't cope with something unless you know what it is. And so giving it a name like ambiguous loss puts it in a category because before that, you had no category for those
Yeah.
kinds of losses. And
Yeah.
so
And
it
it,
makes it more real and you know that you have a handle on it at least to begin the coping.
yeah. And we're going to talk about how, kind of the ways to cope with ambiguous loss, but it could be estrangement or addiction or dementia, as you said, or a miscarriage or infertility or the
That's
loss of the
right.
future we thought we were going to have. I mean, it feels like there's so many different forms this can take. And I know you've written a lot about ambiguous loss as a result of COVID.
Yes, that was at first, before the scientists had figured out what the virus was, we had no idea what this enemy was of all around us globally, the entire world. And it was killing people. And it was making us stay isolated, which in our lifetime, we had never done that much isolation before. Um, and so it was a very strange time of feeling powerless. Um, and it was no accident, I think, that many people took up to baking bread because you can control those 2 hours. You know, you have a recipe and the outcome is, you know, the outcome will be good. And I thought that's wonderful that people are coping like that because we were indeed powerless and helpless at first. Later on, we got vaccines and we learned things to help prevent the spread of it even more. But it was a very, very difficult time for the world.
Yes, it really was. And a lot of losses came out of that, of relationships, of jobs, of futures, of families, of all sorts of things. So, what is it in your research and understanding? I mean, I can guess, but you're the expert. What makes ambiguous loss in some ways? I mean, not that as someone who is deeply intimate with physical loss through death, and having the bodies right there and not having anything ambiguous about it, is profoundly painful. But in some ways, ambiguous loss can be even harder to hold because of the ambiguousness of it. So, can you share, what distinguishes it in terms of the impact?
Yes, and that's a very important point you bring up. First of all, there are no rituals for ambiguous loss. And after a death, there are usually rituals depending on your own values and belief systems. They vary across cultures, of course, which is fine. But there is something that brings the community in to help support you when there's a verified death in the family. And that brings some comfort, but also it brings reality. Something has changed. My loved one is gone. And that helps us when someone dies that we care about to have that support from other people around us. It's essential. Now, with ambiguous loss, there is none of that. No rituals. There is no certificate, official certificate. There is no comfort usually from neighbors and friends because many people in the public arena don't know what to do with an ambiguous loss. I don't blame them.
Yeah.
We have to come up with those rituals. And a ritual may not, in fact, be the exact right thing because an ambiguous loss can go on for a lifetime, even across generations, as it did for many families who had family members stolen away from them eons ago. And we know now that trauma can pass across the generations. And so we have a lot to think about how can the public recognize the fact when someone has somebody missing and give them comfort and support.
I mean, I'm just thinking about all of the people who've had loved ones abducted, or even a mother, a couple of moms recently, because I work with a lot of grieving moms, among other grievers. But we were just recently, we did a retreat for 75 grieving mamas,
Mhm.
and several of them were sharing how hard it was because their children's bodies had never been recovered, kind of what you were talking about. Even
Right.
maybe a little less ambiguous than like someone missing in action and during the Vietnam War, where you don't know necessarily they could still be in prison somewhere or wherever.
Right.
But this mama, this one mama, touched me so much because she was saying, like, I know he's gone, but at the same time, because I don't have a body, there's a little part of me that thinks maybe he's in Switzerland or something, like,
Yes.
maybe he's
Yes.
lost his memory
Yes.
or maybe he's hiding,
I
right?
think that's a normal reaction to an
Yeah.
abnormal situation. Human beings need to see the body or to see the death certificate or the DNA report. Or, as I wrote in the book, I witnessed my husband's last breath. That was a gift
Mhm.
for exactly what you said this mother said. If you don't see that, if you don't have a body to see, um, and support around you to say, yes, they're gone, then there is always that inkling you have that, oh my goodness, I think I just saw her down the street. Or I think she may be alive somewhere, or he may still be somewhere. I just don't know. That's kind of a normal reaction, but it's a normal reaction to an abnormal situation.
Yeah.
So don't blame yourself if you have that reaction.
What do you recommend? I mean, well, there's a lot of things you recommend that we'll get into, and maybe this is part of that larger conversation. But if someone is in that, it's obviously going to be a little different if you are going through, ambiguous loss because your loved one is, has dementia, for instance, or versus ambiguous loss you're grappling with in the scenario I just mentioned with the mama and the body that's still missing. You'd probably handle those differently, but for someone who in general, and I know your book, your newest book is The Myth of Closure, and maybe this is where that comes in. I definitely want to talk about that. But
Mm.
what can you do to hold that more fully or feel more supported? Especially, I mean, it would be nice, and I know a lot of your work is about helping the world become more supportive of those grappling with ambiguous loss, but right now it's not that. So what can we do individually to support ourselves?
I recommend highly both and thinking, which I write about in The
Yes.
Myth of Closure. Um, and what I mean by that is it's called academically dialectical thinking. But what it really means is, and authors and writers talk about this, um, it means being able to hold two opposing ideas in your mind at the same time. F. Scott Fitzgerald wrote about that. Um, Let me give you some examples when there's an ambiguous loss. You might say to yourself, oh, well, let's say it's a family where the young son or daughter has said, "You're dead to me. I don't want to come home anymore." And so it's a breakup of the family. And so the parents are distraught about that, as I understand that, of course, is a normal reaction to an abnormal situation again. And so they might say, the parents might say, our son is gone physically, and he's still in our heart and mind. And so you don't give up. You still think of him and love him. And that, by the way, is as close to the truth as you can get. For example, if a child is kidnapped, if an adult is kidnapped, the cruelest thing you can say to them, can't you see they're dead? They've been missing for so long. We know. We have no evidence. And so again, move to both and thinking. She's probably alive and maybe not. Or she's probably dead and maybe not. Those are two opposing ideas, and that's as close to the truth as you can get with an unclear loss, an ambiguous loss. No professional, nor no neighbors, no friends or family members should say, "Can't you see they're dead?" That's a
No,
very cruel thing to do.
it is. And, I think about this just with regular, unambiguous loss. It's something that I try to teach grievers all the time because just around the idea simply that you can hold the pain of the loss and joy at the same time, or be
Yes,
heartbroken and grateful at the same time, or
exactly.
feel relief and also profound sadness that your loved one is gone after a very long and arduous illness.
As part of normal grief,
Yeah,
which we don't talk about enough. Grief is too often pathologized these
yeah.
days. Insurance may have something to do with that you have to have a diagnosis in order to have some payment. However, I remember when after my husband died, I went to the doctor, and here in Minnesota, they have a little questionnaire at the beginning to make sure there's no violence in your family. So they said, um, "Are you feeling violated?" I said, "No." And then they said, "Are you depressed?" And I said, "No, I'm grieving." And she asked it again, and she said, "Are you depressed?" And I said, "No, I'm grieving." My husband had just died a week or two before. And she said, "Well, we have no place for that." And
That
that's
doesn't check a box.
there's no box to check. So normal grieving means you'll still be sad, maybe 20 years from when you lost your loved one. If you hear a piece of music or you smell some perfume or you go to a place that reminds you of when you were with them, then you have a tear or two. That's normal. That's normal grieving. You never get over it. There is no closure. Stop using that word unless you're talking about, as here in Minnesota, when there's a blizzard, we say road closure.
That's the only kind of closure. So
Yeah,
let's
or a
talk about
store
that. Why
closure.
why are we so drawn to this idea that grief has to be somehow closed or resolved?
Finish. Well, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, who you really should read her last books because she changes her mind about the 5 stages.
Yeah.
And I think we misunderstood her 5 stages, thinking that when we got to the 5th one, we'd be done and wouldn't hurt anymore. We expect to not hurt. This is cultural. If we were Buddhists, we wouldn't think this way because they believe that suffering is part of life and that you can both suffer and have joyous moments. We live in a mastery-oriented culture, which is very successful in solving problems. And like we did at the pandemic, my goodness, we figured out the problem and came up with a vaccine. Um, so we are used to solving a problem. Well, you really can't solve the pain of death. It's just a human, if you've ever fallen in love, if you are attached, then the cost of that attachment is that you will be sad when that person dies or leaves. So it has to do with attachment. It has to do with love. Um, so what we need to do then is to not be so masterful. In other words, some cultures are not. The research shows that in some faraway indigenous culture, um, the community tends to dream a lot about after a death. And I don't know if they appoint a dreamer or if it's anybody can dream, but the first person who dreams where the missing person is becomes the final say in the community.
Hmm.
So if they dream they're dead, then the community believes they're dead. If they dream they're alive, then the community believes that. Well, that's not us. We are fixers. We are doers. We are controllers. And while that's very good for getting a man to the moon, a woman soon too, I believe, it doesn't help with the phenomenon of death or ambiguous loss.
It's true that I was just saying this to a mama who came for a meetup who was worried. A lot of times people worry about themselves. Like, I think she's a couple 2 or 3 years out, and she's like, "I was doing fine," and then just lately, and I think, we were able to see what were the catalysts for this, but she was like, "Lately, I am just so depressed. I'm so depressed." And I kept saying, "You aren't depressed. You are grieving. It is different. It feels very much like depression, but it's grief and it's normal to years out." So you talked about one key factor in terms of like holding the closure, right? And the myth of closure, right? That finite point we're not going to reach where it's all done. I'm done grieving. Everything's
Right,
fine.
right.
You
It's
talked
more
about holding the both
oscillation.
and
Uh-huh.
there are other things that you write about that I feel, these different elements of healing that are so important. Finding meaning, adjusting mastery, reconstructing identity, all of that. Can you speak to some of those variables as too? Because I feel like that's super important.
After, all the families I've worked with over the decades, more than 50 years actually, I came up with 6 guidelines. I call them guidelines. I mean for them to be softer. And in the book, The Myth of Closure, I present them as a circle. And I mean that. I have great respect for Kubler-Ross. I like her a lot. We both had Swiss fathers, so I feel like she's a sister in some ways. And she said too, don't make it linear, because then you think when you get to the end you'll be fine, and it's not that. It's a circle, and you go back and forth. And as she said, it's messy.
Yeah.
So it's not even in the line in the circle. The first one I listed, because I really do like Viktor Frankl's work, Finding Meaning,
Me too.
is finding meaning. But I need to tell you that sometimes it takes years to find meaning. And sometimes the meaning changes over time. So just know that one won't happen overnight, but put it as very important. The other one is you adjust your need for mastery. And we just talked about that. Even though you're an American, we can't control everything. And the pandemic certainly showed us that. But we're also having climate change issues. And we may be able to control some of it, but nature is hard to control all the time, the weather, the tornadoes, etc. So we have to adjust that. And yet there are some people who need more mastery if they aren't making decisions on their own, if they're saying, I'm no good, if I'm still sad, I don't deserve to live, and so on. That is depression. And then you do need professional help if you're self-loathing. And then you have to reconstruct your identity. Am I still a mother if I've lost my baby? When people ask me how many children I have and I had a miscarriage, what number do I use? And so on. So you reconstruct your identity. Who are you now if your husband has been missing for 20 years? Are you married or can you date again? And then another pillar is ambivalence. And this is not a psychiatric ambivalence I'm talking about. It's a normal reaction where you love the person who is missing, but you also at a certain time may feel angry that it's still, the pain is still there. And know that that's just a normal reaction to an abnormal situation. Caregivers tell me this all the time, that there comes a time when they say, I'm losing my identity. I can't see my friends anymore. I feel like I'm a prisoner. And that's a normal reaction to the disease, not the person. The culprit is the disease, not the person who has it.
Yes.
And so if you can see that, it might help you to normalize what you're feeling. But of course, all caregivers need to have some time off
Yeah.
because otherwise it is very unhealthy for them. And caregivers die at a rate 66% higher
Yeah.
than
So
those in
often
the age
sooner
group.
than their
Their cohort.
charges.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And so then you revise attachment. So with ambiguous loss, the attachment is unclear, um, and yet it's real. So that's where I certainly use both and thinking, because you can't say, I have to see a transformation here like you do with a death when you see the body or the death certificate. You can't make that transformation because you're in a state of uncertainty. So that's where you're going to have to live. And so you want to build more resilience for that. And the both and thinking is probably one way to do it in your family. You know, she's probably dead and maybe not, or she's coming back and maybe not. Each person makes up their own line. And then finally, you have to discover new hope. Viktor Frankl said there's no hope without meaning and no meaning without hope. But I have to clarify, it's new hope that you need, something new to hope for. And for example, parents of missing children may work to, as someone did here in Minnesota, work to make it quicker for the public to know that a child is missing.
Mhm.
When her son, it was Patty Wetterling, when her son went missing, all people had was Xeroxing and putting papers on lampposts. And she brought about the law that changed that. And today, it's immediate. It comes on your telephone.
Yeah. An Amber Alert.
Amber Alert, exactly. And that Amber was the California father, I believe, who had a missing daughter named Amber, but they worked together at the same time. So those 6 pillars, mastery, identity, ambivalence, attachment, and hope, and meaning are very important. But that's a lifetime of work, I just read.
Yeah. That never ends.
It never ends. And I'm not talking about therapy. I'm talking about self. You can do this as alone, but you can also do it in groups. I highly recommend groups of peers who have the same loss, the same disease in the family, or the same kind of missingness, or the same kind of death. Right now, we need human connection. I think post-pandemic, we really suffered with that isolation. And so find somebody to talk to.
Yeah.
I think
So
is
important. And someone who really understands, as you were saying, your unique pain, and someone who can their experience normalizes what you're going through.
normalize it.
I'm curious what you think about continuing bonds and where that fits in with ambiguous loss.
Thank you for bringing that up. The book Continuing Bonds was written in the 1990s. We're just discovering it now, finally. And essentially, the idea is that when someone dies, you don't just turn it off, that the bonds continue in your heart and mind. It's like a psychological family of your grandma and grandpa and your ancestors and so on. By the way, I worked in Fukushima after the tsunami there when they had many missing people. And they use ancestor worship there. And so they have a society that does continuing bonds openly, and they
Yeah.
have altars in their homes and
Normalized.
so on. They normalized it. It's their ritual, which is helpful to them because they feel that their ancestors are looking over the people who are missing and taking care of them. So here in this country, I think we should think about continuing bonds more and not getting over it and not saying, I need closure on this because it hurts so much. Well, it'll hurt more if you keep chasing something that's not attainable. And I think if you ever were attached to somebody, if you ever had a relationship or loved them, you can't get over it. So look for something else. Those 6 things I just talked about, meaning and something new to hope for. A new purpose in life often is to remember the person who's missing. And you don't need a monument like in New York City after 9/11, which is wonderful, by the way. It could just be something made out of local rocks on the beach of a fishing village. But the most important thing about memorializing is use the name of the person who's gone. Use their name. We don't need statues, but their name needs to be somewhere so the family has a place to go to see their name since they don't have something in a cemetery.
Yeah. I think that's a really good point. A marker or a something that like a since we can't necessarily have a headstone that marks their
Just
name.
a
Yeah,
marker
and
that they
speak
can
their
touch.
name. I mean, I think this is with people who we know and aren't ambiguous about losing. Um, Speaking their name and having their name spoken is such a
Yeah.
huge part of it for healing.
Yes.
Yeah, I
Yes.
love all of that. And what you're really talking about with all of these things, all of these 6 sort of pillars or components is this idea of like, okay, we can't change the fact that we're in this ambivalent, maybe yes, maybe no, maybe they're okay, maybe they're not okay, they're here, they're not here space. And that's so hard to hold, right? Just like
It is for us,
for us. But
but
we
it
can
wouldn't be for like Buddhists can.
right. It's
Yeah.
hard for us to hold in this Western typical world, but these strategies you're talking about, just like healing from unambiguous loss, I always say that, the grief itself doesn't get smaller. We just expand bigger around it, and our capacity to hold it and move with it and be with it grows.
And
And in a way, that's what you're describing with with these components of
to
working
hold it.
with and letting go of the myth of closure and working with some of these components of healing that you mentioned.
I make a distinction between grief and sadness too.
Mhm.
Sadness is grief is a normal reaction to, we used to say death, but think it's can be a ambiguous loss too. Sadness, though, is a normal reaction that will continue with you um, for a lifetime. At times, and so if you call it grief, it's okay. If you call it sadness, it's okay. Um, Freud made a difference between mourning and melancholia. One was pathology and one wasn't. I'm not so particular about that,
Yeah.
but I think you should know the difference between what's normal and what you need help with. You need to go and see somebody. If you're suicidal, if you're self-loathing, if it's been 5 years and you're still in raw grief that you are at first, and you can't function in daily life, etc. Um, so know that sadness is something that will ebb and flow throughout your life. It's called oscillation now, and it is, in fact, I support the research. I value the research by Niemeyer and others. Oscillation is like the tide coming in and out, ebbs and flows. Some days you feel great, and then maybe 10 days later you have a bad day. Early on, the first couple of years, that's pretty normal. And it'll still happen 20 years from now if you see something that reminds you of this person and hits you with sadness. That's normal too.
So after spending a career studying loss, resilience, uncertainty, what have people that you've worked with and helped taught you about surviving the unimaginable?
Oh, I'm glad you asked that. I am awed by how many people can live and live well despite loss, clear or ambiguous. I am awed by that, how resilient a lot of people are. Uh, and it's not everybody, of course. Some people are devastated, and devastated, some are for life. But I am awed by the ones who can stand up and dust themselves off and carry on, take care of the family tasks, raise the rest of the children, take care of themselves, and move forward with new hope and meaning. That is awesome to see.
Yeah.
And the resilience will surprise you in places. And I think we shouldn't judge each other. In Japan, after the tsunami, there were things said like a mother whose baby was washed out of her arms. There's a kind lady in a faraway island taking care of my baby. Now, ordinarily, I was trained that that would be delusional. I just smiled and I said, good. I would not take that meaning away from her because it allows her to take care of her other children and move forward with her life despite this awful thing that happened to her. So we need to watch people to see how they cope. And many people cope very successfully because they have a resilience. And by the way, children are even more resilient than adults.
I was just recently interviewing Dr. Daniel Amen, who's a neuroscientist that studies brains. And I thought you'll find this interesting, but he saw significant changes in people's brains when they do and do not have hope, which I thought was really
I like that.
fascinating and beautiful. And also, we were speaking, I was asking him just from a brain perspective, why I was curious about why some people are more resilient than others. And he basically said or confirmed what I believe is that, it in large part depends on how much trauma you've already had and to what extent you have worked through that trauma, because the only way we build resilience is through suffering, a la the Buddhist thing, right? Like that's what teaches us resilience. And so
Coming out the other side.
I've noticed that those who seem, not that everyone can't get through this, not with closure, but get through this in a really beautiful way. But for some of us, it's smoother than others because we've already had so much suffering that we've worked through, and that we have some resilience under our belt.
Right. And just know that's why we have to be careful how we parent our children.
Yes.
And right now, the reports are coming in that the children don't know how to cope with stress
Yeah.
from educators and so on. What that means is parents didn't allow them to learn how to cope with stress. They were trying to be too good. I mean, they wanted to be really helicoptering. Yeah. And then there are other examples of people who have historically been victims of prejudice from the period of the slaves, from the Holocaust, from countries that have been war-torn for generations. That is called epigenetic. It is passed down through the generations, both through nature and nurture, how you parent, but it's also too much stress and too much adapting can hurt the immune system of the body.
And the nervous system. Yeah.
Yes, and the nervous system. So we have to be careful about taking care of ourselves first. As I said, children are very resilient. And after 9/11, when I was working with the families of the missing in New York, the parents asked us how to grieve with their children, because they were going into a closet to cry, but so were their children.
Yeah.
And so we literally had to teach them that it was okay to show tears to each other and to grieve together if the father or mother was missing. And that was a new idea for a very stoic culture in that case. So
Yeah,
it can be
that makes
done.
a lot of sense. I remember I've shared this before with these peeps here, but on the night that my 16-year-old died, I was
I'm sorry.
thank you. I was beside myself. I was keening on the floor. I was incoherent. I was, as you could imagine, but on steroids. And my husband, after I don't know how many hours, came and got me off the floor and said, Jackson, our youngest son, who was about 14 months younger than his brother, it is really crying and calling for you. He was 15, his brother was 16. So I pulled myself together and I went into our room where he was lying on the bed and I snuggled up with him and he said, I am afraid that you're going to go crazy and I'm going to lose you too.
Yeah.
And I said, I am going to go a little crazy for a little while, but I'm not going to go permanently crazy. I'm going to be okay. I'm going to make sure you are taken care of through all of it. We're going to be okay. But I am going to be a hot mess for a little bit. And I had showed him tears. I'd already learned when my mother died 10 years before I had done what you describe. And then I overheard him telling my friend, I don't think mommy's sad her mommy died because I never see her cry. And
Oh,
that was a really big lesson to me. And
oh
so
my.
from then on, I cried in front of him when I wanted to.
Very important.
But in this case, it was so flooding and he was so scared. But it was a really powerful moment for me because he helped me in that moment make the decision I'm gonna be okay. I don't know how. I don't know how that's gonna
Yeah.
happen yet, but I'm gonna find a way to get through this, and I will die on the hill that if as parents, if we can be okay, our kids can be okay. And that doesn't mean being stoic and hiding your pain.
Right.
That means showing them pain
You have to show it to
and
them. Yeah.
re-regulation and waves and healing. And, we just had I think he's been gone 5.5 years. We just had his birthday. He would have been 22. And my son is home. The youngest, he's now in college and was home for the summer. And we lit a candle for him in the morning. And as he's leaving, he's like, are you going to be okay? I was like, I'm going to be fine. I'm going to cry. I'm going to be sad and I'm going to be fine. And by the time he came home that day, I was fine, when he
That's
got
the
home from
both
work.
and.
But I think
That's the
that's a
both
really
and.
important lesson for them.
Yeah. You can be sad and you can be okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Holding both ends, right.
Both and. Exactly.
So if there is one thing that you hope every grieving person, every person struggling with loss in general, but especially ambiguous loss, understands about healing, what would you want that to be?
Well, I think that there won't be any healing with ambiguous loss, that it is something you have to live with if the loss is permanent. Now, that may be different for people who are taking care of someone with dementia or terminal cancer, and then they die. Then you have to switch gears.
Mm.
Um, but the ambiguous loss itself most often doesn't end well. Um, the missing person stays missing or turns up dead, or um, the families search, but it sometimes doesn't work. So we have to know that in some cases, through no fault of that person, they have to live with not knowing for the rest of their life. So the best thing to do is to support them and to listen to their story and to know what ambiguous loss is so you don't talk about closure. I don't think you should use closure with a clear-cut death either. So I think in general, the public needs to be more educated. Professionals need to be more educated. Clergy needs to be more educated. There should be rituals for people who have a missing loved one. And some churches, the Buddhists in Japan, did make a ceremony for them. Other religions need to do the same because it's a terrible loss.
Is
It's
there a
terrible.
ritual or an idea? I know everybody's different, but are there any rituals that you've heard of that we can share here that someone who maybe isn't even part of a religious institution might want to try?
There was a couple in Cambridge, near Boston, that had a ritual for their son who was still living, but he was a super athlete in junior high and then had an accident and became wheelchair ridden for the rest of his life. They gathered their friends, had a gathering. They followed the book that I wrote for Harvard Press, Ambiguous Loss. I wasn't there. I just trusted they were doing some readings, some talking, some music together with friends. And then they also had another ceremony with the boy there that had a different tone to it. And it was more celebratory of what he could still do.
Yeah.
So again, human contact is your medicine for this. However, if you have certain symptoms, then you need to see a professional.
Yeah, as we said, if you're not wanting to live, if you can't function, if it's been 5 years and it still feels like the first few months and you haven't made, you haven't had any relief
Self-loathing,
and self-loathing. if you
hating
really-
yourself, saying you don't deserve to live.
I think, and I love the idea of creating rituals around, and we do rituals all the time for those we know are gone and we aren't ambiguous about, but we need more ritual for ambiguous loss. I'm so grateful to you, Dr. Boss, for all the work you're doing and have done in the world to inform us and to educate us and open our hearts to this
Thank
really
you.
important vein of loss. Thank you so much for joining us.
It was a pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks for listening and crying out loud with me. If something you heard today helped or made you feel less alone, please follow, share, and review. And for more tools and a community that deeply understands you and your pain, visit the Grief Healing Collective at drlauraberman.com/grief healing. I'll see you next time on Crying Out Loud.
There's a hollow in my chest where your laughter used to be. Space at every table, an empty seat I see. The woman I was before you left didn't make it through, but love is still alive in me and still there between us two. They say just let it be alright, just keep your pain inside. But love this deep and pain this true were never meant to hide. So I'm crying out loud, I'm not holding it in, I'm shrinking my heart for the shape I am in. If grief is the echo of love that resounds, then I will warn you crying out loud. Ooh. Some days grief's a tsunami, some days it's just a wave, some days I'm barely breathing, some days I feel so brave, but I am learning slowly what the breaking's about. The only way to freedom is feeling it out. Every tear that hits the ground is not a sign I'm weak, it's the sign